So I've seen a lot of articles recently that are trying to politicize health, like Vanity Fair's article titled, "Why Americans Are Obsessed with Protein." These articles make it seem like consumption of protein is optional, or worse, detrimental to our health. They paint the consumption of protein in a divisive light that restricts it only to the manosphere or podcast bros. According to these journalists, consumption of protein is reserved for one side of the political spectrum. And we all know what side they are referring to. If you emphasize eating protein, you're far right. If you don't want to be mistaken as being far right, then you don't eat too much protein. Or you keep your protein eating habits to yourself. The thing about seeing so many of these articles, to me, is that I don't live in the US anymore. I live in a country where health isn't yet politicized, and I moved out of the US before it got categorized as a far right thing. Actually, when I was growing up, organic foods were more of a left thing. The documentary, What the Health, which is like 10 years old now, was definitely far left when it came out, but if it came out today, most of the ideals in it would be considered far right. And that just goes to show you how far we've come. It's important for us to remember that politicizing health isn't a global phenomenon. The truth is, we all know someone who's aging, and nutrition and exercise are even more crucial as we get older. Your parents are getting older, my parents are getting older, we all have loved ones that are impacted by popular dietary advice. So why is this being politicized? And how important is protein? Last week, the Korea Times, a primarily liberal news company, put out an article titled "The Hidden Cost of Hospitalization, Muscle Loss, and Functional Decline in Older Adults." And it was actually really informative. The article discusses 4 recommendations to address the problem of muscle loss as we age that we'll cover at the end of this video. You might have heard that the world in general is facing a potential population collapse, highlighted in the news with South Korea and Japan leading the way with some claims that if people don't start having more babies, South Korea will be extinct in the near future. As the population ages and shrinks, there will be more burden on hospitals and social welfare programs. That means more taxes, which will make consequences and the costs of hospital trips more severe than in the past. The article starts off by explaining that when a patient over 70 is confined to a hospital bed, even for just 10 days, the synthesis rate of muscle protein in the legs drops by around 30%, and overall muscle mass decreases by more than 1 kilogram. Another study found that healthy elderly individuals lost 6% of their muscle mass and 16% of their lower body strength simply from 10 days of bed rest. That's a 6% loss of muscle from just 10 days of bed rest. But it gets worse. The article claims that this muscle loss can be irreversible in a lot of patients. Why is this so important? The benefits of having adequate muscle mass include metabolization of carbohydrates, healthy immune system function, mood and memory function, and increased bone density. In short, making sure we have adequate muscle mass makes us more resilient to falls, cognitive issues, and helps us to get less injured if we do fall, while also helping us to recover more quickly, especially as we age. So imagine this. You're aging, you fall, you break your hip, and you're in a hospital bed for 10 days. You lose 1 kilogram of muscle mass. That's 2.2 pounds of muscle that you might not be able to get back. Now imagine taking the same fall, but you've been doing some resistance training a couple times per week for the past decade or so, maybe even longer. You break your hip, but your fall was less severe. You still spend time in the hospital, but it's only 4 days instead of 10. You lose some muscle mass, but you also had more than you would have if you weren't weight training regularly to begin with. At the very least, this is kind of like having airbags in cars. You might not need them all the time, but when you do, they can mean the difference between being in an intensive care unit for weeks or going home from the emergency room the next day after your accident. Not a perfect analogy, but it's the best I can do right now. But there's more to it than just working out. To build and maintain muscle mass, we need to consume adequate amounts of high-quality protein. Chances are, with the modern diet, most of us are not getting enough protein. Even if you work out regularly, you still need to consume enough nutrients to build and maintain those muscles. The recommendation in this article is that adults over the age of 65 should consume 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram, or about 0.54 to 0.73 grams of protein per pound of body weight. Which to me honestly sounds a bit low, since 1 gram or more of protein per pound of body weight, or 2.2 grams per kilogram, is considered the minimum for gaining or even just maintaining muscle mass. But This is actually higher than the recommended daily allowance of protein of 0.8 grams per kilogram or 0.36 grams per pound of body weight, which is defined in this article by Harvard and also referenced in the Vanity Fair article. And the Vanity Fair article echoes the same sentiment as the Harvard article about protein, but rather than explain any ill effects of having too little protein or the dangers of losing muscle mass in old age, Keziah Weir, the author, focuses on how consuming protein is masculine or part of the, quote, manosphere, unquote. And honestly, this is why I'm really thankful to have a viewpoint from a country where health isn't politicized, or it's not yet politicized. The Korea Times article talks about the real problems of sarcopenia, which is the term for muscle loss, and its consequences in terms of physical health, mental health, and longevity. Rather than focus on how a health decision is perceived politically or ideologically, the article offers 4 recommendations to, quote, shift our mindset from a disease-centered approach to a function-centered integrated model of care to address the problem of sarcopenia in us as we age. So, according to the South Korean article, what should we do? First, we should use an approach to health that assesses, quote, function, cognition, nutrition, medication, and social support to create tailored treatment plans for patients to help predict and prevent functional decline. Second, we should encourage early movement and rehabilitation plans for recovering elderly patients in hospitals to reduce the risks of falls and sarcopenia. Third, use dietary intervention and protein supplementation at an intake of 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And fourth, educate family and caregivers about the importance of mobility, exercise, and nutrition to prevent unnecessary long-term hospital stays. Imagine that. So maybe there's hope for humanity after all. Maybe health will stop being politicized in the US and other countries where it's being used to divide us. Maybe we should reconsider the importance of protein and avoid a sedentary lifestyle while we still have mobility. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below so we can continue this conversation. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.